What's up, guys? Joe here. Now, I wasn't really prepared to do a video today, so you kind of get casual Joe today, but at least I got a cool hat on, so that makes up for it, right? So yesterday, I released Total CMS 1.8, and I kind of leaked it, had a little surprise in it, and this is a new stack called Total Loop, and it's pretty cool. It's very powerful, but I do have to admit, it's definitely meant for probably more experienced users. Okay. If you're not experienced, feel free to watch this video. I don't think it's too difficult to use to get your head around, but it definitely is geared towards more advanced users because it really relies on you building your layouts and you doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the styles and the layouts and the content and stuff like that. Just kind of gives you the data. Okay. So essentially what this does is it allows you to create custom layout sets based on data from Total CMS. What could this data be? It could be blog categories. It could be blog posts. It could be blog tags. It could be blog labels, genres, authors. I even have a use case in there of gallery. Now that one's definitely more involved and probably more difficult to use. The things that are probably going to be the easiest are blog categories, blog tags, blog authors, labels, genres, stuff like that. Those are going to be pretty simple to do or relatively simple compared to doing something like using this for blog posts instead of using the blog list stack. Okay. I mean, you could potentially use this instead of the blog list stack, build your own custom one, but it wouldn't be too easy. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump in. I have a really cool, nicely styled example. So let's go ahead and play. Now here is just a simple web page, and it has a blog list up here that lists some sample test data. And down here, what you'll notice is this is a very nicely generated grid of all of the categories within this blog. So, right now we have the access to like the blog filters, and we can have a list of categories that, just has an ugly list, right? But we can now, with this Total Loop stack, dynamically generate very nice looking layouts for things like categories or tags and things of that nature. And what's cool is if I click on this, it will dynamically filter this blog list. So it behaves kind of like, blog filter does, but, this allows us to have full customization over the layout. Okay. Now this is using this is using Foundation 6's block grid. Okay. So essentially what's going on is this is actually using a block grid and creating one of those dynamically on the fly. So that's what this can do for us. Let's go ahead and look at WrapReaver and see how this is accomplished. So what's really cool about Total Loop is that it integrates with the existing stacks that you have. Now, this works really well with Foundation 6 stacks. Okay. Now, I can't guarantee how it will work on other stacks outside of this, but with all of the Foundation 6 layout stacks, such as, Columns Pro, Block Grid, maybe even a button group, right? You can create these dynamic pieces of content using Total Loop. So here I have a block grid. And if we look at this layer, let's go ahead and look at that web page again. We'll notice that this very first one is an all category. It's kind of like, kind of to reset to go back. And that's just static, right? So this one is static. But then all the subsequent categories are dynamically generated. So here we have in this block grid, the first cell in the block grid is a static one. I just have all. Now I'm not going to go over how I built this layout. It's just a, kind of traditional layout where if I hover over it, this column will be displayed on hover. And when you unhover, it's just the picture is displayed, right? Now, if we go over here, if you notice, instead of a block grid cell, I drag in a total loop directly into block grid. At that point, I build in my block grid cell inside total loop. And essentially, whatever you put inside total loop, it will duplicate that layout for every single item in the data set that you want it configured. So if we look at total loop, this is currently looking through blog categories, right? So you put in the CMS ID of your blog, you have blog categories, you can have all kinds of other filter settings. The settings for this are identical to blog filter and also to the Foundation 6 menus integration, where you can, hide featured stuff, you can do all that jazz. Now, if you're using blog stuff here, you can set the blog list page. If you leave this blank, it will use the current page you're on. You can set up acronym and word formatting just like you could in the filters in the Foundation 6 menus. Then we also have the ability to do blog posts. Okay, so you can limit the number of blog posts that are displayed if you're using that method. Now with this, it is limited. You don't have access to things like load more and stuff like that, like you do in the blog list. It will just display everything. Okay. This only generates HTML. There's 0 JavaScript, 0 CSS. And let's just look at this really quick. So we have our block grid cell. Okay. And I have some classes. But again, I'm not going to really review any of that. Inside of our link container, you'll notice that I'm using some macros here. So in the URL, I'm using this macro, which is curly brace URL. Very similar syntax to the blog list macros, the exact same syntax. And I'll show you which macros are available and how you can determine which macros are available, depending on the data set that you're using. So here's the first one I'm using. I'm using the URL inside the link. In the header, I'm using the label. In the header below that, I'm specifying the count, because if you notice, I have the count available. So if we go back and I hover over, you see I have entrepreneur, which is the label, 1 available, because there's one blog list in there. Or I'm sorry, there's one blog post within it with that category. But if we look at something else like vacation, if I click on that, that has 3. And if you look, it says 3 available. So we have access to a lot of kind of metadata within this, which is really nice. And then if we look at the picture, essentially the picture is using warehoused images. And if you look at the URL here, it's a common URL. So essentially I've created a gallery here that, I know the URL to that gallery. And if I name the images properly, if I name the images with the slug in the name, I can easily determine the images that we want here. So if I go back here, for example, this image that's here is called dream.jpg. This particular image that I added to the gallery is entrepreneur.jpg, right? Hangouts.jpg. And we can look at those here. So if we look at those images, we'll see that I named them to be exactly what the particular category that image is associated with in the gallery. So that is a trick. You have to make sure that you name the images perfectly, okay? And then here, just on my little sample page, you see it's just a normal gallery. It's not associated with any blog posts. It's just a normal gallery that I uploaded all of those images to, okay? And then here, I can easily determine the URLs to those images. And simply because I know the name is going to use part of the macro itself, we can then determine that with the slug. Okay, so how can we determine what can be done, what can't be done, what macros to use, and what macros we can't use? Okay. One thing I should also note is that, unfortunately, Total Loop does not work in preview. So like if I were to preview this page here, you'll see that we kind of get this somewhat of a layout, right? But it has just all the macros. It's just basically it takes the macros and puts them in there for you. So it does have something in preview, but not much. Once we publish this page, you'll see what it is, which is what I showed you here. This is the published page. Okay, but we have some helper functions in here that allow us to know what data we have access to, okay? Because if we look at this grid up here, I'm going to go ahead and unhide this. We'll see that here I have a total loop that goes through blog categories. But at the very bottom here, there's an advanced setting called Enable Dump Macro. And when you enable the dump macro, you can use this special macro only when that setting is set. and it uses 3 curly braces and the word dump. Okay, so 3 curly braces and a dump. Let's go ahead and publish this online. Okay, here I've published that online. If we scroll down, we'll now see that we have this additional grid that I unhid. And with that dump macro, where the corresponding layout that we want is, in this grid, I'm just putting out a dump. And what we can see is we can see all the data available for each individual category. In this case, I'm doing categories. So here we can see that we have available URL, slug, label, and count. That's all the data that we have access to for when we use categories. Now, it's smart to do this on most blog attribute level things. These are most likely all the attributes that you have access to, but things like blog post and galleries are going to have a lot more. Okay. And some of the things like history won't have a label. It'll just have a slug. So definitely make sure that you check out, the dump for whatever data set that you're using, so that you can actually, know what data is actually available to you. And essentially all these are just macros. So if you wanted to put the URL, you would do curly brace, URL, curly brace. So similar syntax, but you would put in the name of the attribute here, and that will be put directly into the HTML, right? So as you see here, this doesn't give us anything about images, but based on the slug, I know that the gallery name that I added was entrepreneur.jpg, so that I can use that image and reference that because I'm referencing in the slug of this particular category. So again, if you make sure that you upload the images or anything else, maybe a file as well could be done, right? If you upload a file or image or whatever, and you use naming standards, you can do some really cool stuff like this. Now, a cool tip that I did building this layout here was before I built out the total loop, okay, what I did was, let me unhide this grid on the bottom. And basically I built out a block grid with what I wanted it to look like with just straight static text. And then once I got the layout and the content that I wanted, I then, injected all the various macros into it. So I changed this header to be label, and I changed the number in this one to be the count, right? And then I went inside the link stack and changed the actual link to the URL macro. And then I went to the picture stack and changed that to be warehoused, and I put in the URL with the special slug in there to make sure that it matched the image that I uploaded to the gallery, right? So that's a cool, useful tip right there, to help you, generate these layouts more easily. And again, this example just uses block grid, but we can use any of the Foundation 6 stacks. It works great with them. So I would try Columns Pro would be a good one. I did a nice example yesterday with a button group. So we had, just a button in a button group for every single tag or every category. Really cool idea. So yeah, this is a really powerful stack. So there you go. That's Total Loop. As you see, it is pretty powerful, but it's also semi-basic. I think for more experienced users, as long as you're not scared of, especially of those macros, right, and kind of digging into Foundation. Now, I'm using Foundation layouts here because I think those are really nice. You can really nicely dynamically build out grids and columns and stuff like that with this. If you didn't have access to that, you could probably use, you could definitely use just in normal stacks, just maybe a stack on top of each other or something like that. But, I think the power is really with Foundation 6 here using with Total Loop. Again, it could potentially work with other things out there, but I haven't tested it out. So I'm excited to see what you guys build with this. I kind of released this quickly because I wanted to get it into your hands to see what you guys can do with it. And see what you build and get more ideas and see what we can tweak and add more features and make it even better in the future. So I hope you enjoy Total Loop, experiment with it, play with it, talk amongst each other on the community and get ideas on how you can best use it. And I can't wait to see what you build. So hope you enjoy it. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.